I'm here with Cynthia Matosian. Cynthia, you know, I'm not of the impression that one size kind of fits all when we're talking about intraocular lenses for patients. But you've gone kind of one step further, and you have ways of evaluating patients to suggest to you, to kind of guide you in conjunction with the patient as a team to pick out the lens that's going to be right. Now, you called this successful IOL pairing. I think that's a great name, sort of, you know, like what wine am I going to have? But what are some of the parameters that you consider, you know, that feed into this decision-making process?
Actually, I look at a bunch of parameters to make sure I am going to suggest the best possible pairing so the patient can get the optimal outcome in each of his or her eyes. I may opt for a different lens in one eye versus another. So the things I look at, what you asked me, Josh. First, I look at what the patient's occupation and hobbies are. That significantly determines the type of lens that I'm going to suggest. I also look at the ocular surface. How diseased is it? Are there issues with the cornea? Other things to consider is the health, of course, of the posterior pole and the macula. And additional features, is the patient wearing prisms? Does the patient have amblyopia? These are things to consider before suggesting an implant that will achieve the best visual outcome for each patient.
So Cynthia, let me kind of take you through this, because you just made a bunch of points. This was really dense. I want to kind of tease it out. So when you talk about evaluating the cornea surface, I mean, obviously, if someone has got surface pathology or a tear film problem, you're going to try to manage that prior to surgery. I'm not, you know, let's skip that step. But if someone has persistent corneal pathology, I'm assuming that what you're saying is that you're going to be less likely to steer the patient towards a multifocal lens.
That's right. If somebody has, let's say, gutata, or an epithelial basement membrane dystrophy, I may shy away from recommending a multifocal implant for that patient. Similarly, if the patient selects a monofocal lens, I try to select the monofocal that best matches the patient's corneal spherical aberration in order to enhance contrast sensitivity for that patient.
Oh, that's a great point. And when you say about, you know, asking the patient what the occupation is, the way that I phrase things to the patient, probably you do something similar too, is what do you spend most of the day doing? You know, and then, because I for whatever reason, I had last year a couple concert pianists that I wound up doing cataract surgery on, and their needs were just so completely different. So what are some of the ways that you assess what the patient's needs are going to be?
Well, because that's such an important thing, if the patient spends most of his or her day, let's say, at the computer or looking at sheets of music, their needs are different than those of a truck driver who drives at night looking at headlights. So I have designed a questionnaire where I ask my patients very specific questions in order to determine where they spend most of their day. Consequently, I recommend an implant to match their needs.
Oh, that's great. Does the questionnaire there then form part of their chart that you can look back on later?
Absolutely. And I designed this questionnaire and I refer to it when I calculate. And on the questionnaire are other things such as previous refractive surgery, history of inflammation in the back of the eye or front of the eye, and all of that is taken into consideration when I choose the implant type.
And you mentioned to determine preoperatively whether the patient's wearing prism, your point being that this patient's going to need glasses after surgery anyway, so maybe, you know, a multifocal lens would be overkill.
Right. Or if somebody has amblyopia, and it's rather dense amblyopia, they may not benefit from a multifocal lens, but they may possibly benefit from an accommodative lens in the other eye so that they can see distance and intermediate and not have issues of rings or halos in one eye versus not in the amblyopic eye.
Now, the last thing that I that I want to ask. You mentioned in conversation before we started shooting this video that one of the factors you assess is angle kappa. I think that's an interesting point, and I want you to kind of talk us through that.
Every patient who is scheduled for a cataract evaluation, I assess their angle kappa, and if they have a large positive angle kappa, I may discourage them from getting a multifocal lens. In my hands, I have found patients with a large angle kappa have issues with multifocals. Therefore, if somebody has a small angle kappa, they have a pristine eye, they are my happiest patients with multifocals. But if it is not a perfect crystal clear system with a good cornea, a healthy macula, and no angle kappa, they do well. Otherwise, they do struggle, and I don't recommend multifocals.
Yeah, because with a large angle kappa, you essentially don't have that sort of coaxial optics. You already are starting out with a compromise, and they're going to be less happy with another compromise that you introduce. This is really, really cool stuff, and I love it because it's just so very, very practical. I really want to thank you for sharing time with us today.
Thank you very much.